Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devin Decker, coming to you directly from 1997, and joining me in the current year, 2023, my host companion, Sejohn Sarowick. Sejohn?
Are you like the Dennis Quaid to my... Who was the kid in that one?
What, Frequency?
I was
It
gonna make a
was Jim
Frequency
Caviezel.
joke.
It was
Jim Caviezel.
Jesus.
That's right, that's right. Dennis Quaid plays Jim Caviezel's dad.
Yeah, which
It's
means
weird.
that Dennis Quaid is God, using the transitive property.
No, wait, isn't that Contact? That's a different one, right?
That's very similar to Frequency, but in Frequency, there's just like a magic ham radio that, because of Aurora Borealis, allows him to communicate with his father. I think it's 20 years in the past, which, oh my God, then my mind is blown because 1997 was 20 years in the past almost.
Yeah,
It's
like
longer
20.
than that. It's... Oh no!
Yeah, you can't... You
My
can't oh,
bones!
the time, it's too short. No, wait a minute.
No, wait, it's actually weirder. I mean, do you know why I'm reporting live from 1997, Sejohn?
You'll be because James Cameron is once again on top. I don't know. What are we doing?
Oh, wow, that'd be... No, because of GoldenEye. We're living in the golden age of GoldenEye. And background, behind the scenes.
Yeah, I didn't play it.
That's... Ever?
No, obviously eventually. No, what's weird is so yeah, GoldenEye, we are here as it has been re-released back onto the Switch, at least on the N64 platform, but they are going to give it its own release, right? Eventually.
I don't think so. I don't think that's what's going to happen. And the reason why is exactly what I want to talk about today. I don't have the expansion pack for Nintendo Switch Online, which...
Oh, I thought you were going to say the little Rumble pack that you needed for the N64.
No, I mean, the Rumble pack is very different, too, than the Memory expansion pack, which came with Donkey Kong 64.
Right.
Oh, Nintendo, selling add-ons before it was cool.
Well, not building a system that could even handle their own games before it was cool.
That's a good point. At least they had like a plan. They're like, the system's not that good right now, but we gave ourselves the option to make it better. That's like the extension port on the NES and the extension port on the Super Nintendo. They used to be forward-thinking, Nintendo.
I mean, it's the preamble to let's connect all these things to the internet so that we can just fix them that way. We'll always have access that way. Like it was systems are never going to be able to keep up with game production going forward. Like they crossed paths at that point where like game production was just going to keep getting better and systems were just not going to be able to handle it because hardware is expensive to make, right? So like how do we leash the software to the hardware? Well, at some point people are going to complain about that. What are some simple things we can do to the hardware to beef it up? And this is like this is just before everything then just gets connected to the internet to fix these problems. And so it's Nintendo solving a future problem, being forward thinking, being progressive. And I think that they still are this. They are still forward thinking and they try and solve a problem that they identify everybody's going to have in 5 years, but they don't have it yet. And then their shit can't keep up to it because they're always thinking 5 years ahead. Think about motion control. Like it's the exact same thing as they're like, we'll figure this out before anybody else. And then they trip over themselves because they're always thinking five years ahead, never thinking about like, also you kind of need to still kind of be here present after you put this thing out, guys. Like a bastard father. You just...
The really crazy thing about the motion control is how all the shovelware people were like, we could use this to like make money hand over fist. If Nintendo wants to be in the future with it, we'll just sit here in the present reskinning Gingerbread Man. Ninja Man? Is that what it's called?
Ninja Bread Man, or even worse than that, we'll take the same clock app and like this one's pink, this one's orange, this one's yellow, this one has a half naked hentai girl in the background, this one has like Mountain Dew background.
It escalated really quickly from base color
really
backgrounds to that girl's boobies are out, Daddy.
Yeah, pretty much what happened on the Wii Shop was everything escalated pretty quickly into porn. So
yeah, well, everything does. Porn is the natural end game for all technology.
Yeah, it is the beginning of all technology, and it is the end of all technology.
It is the alpha, the omega. Yes, porn. What are we talking about? Anywho,
actually, speaking about porn and technology, I do want to talk about Mass Effect 2: Rise of the Space Racists, if we can,
Oh, we will get there, but I'd like to finish up the GoldenEye thing because I think a lot of people have that same confusion that you're going through with.
Well, so because to be clear, the reason I have this confusion is that they announced way back that GoldenEye was going to be coming in like with a slew of other games, right? So like say like 6 months ago, they had mentioned that, right? Sometime in the last month or two, there was some announcement separate for GoldenEye talking about its what do you call it? Its anniversary. The word I couldn't find. It's with its anniversary, there being like a re-release, and the idea that there was this like separate announcement immediately made me think that meant like on its own separate. But it does occur to me that in that re-release announcement, I don't know if they ever specified they didn't mean just that it was going to be on the Switch and available in this form. So there is, it's that bad reporting that we talk about where like one person says it and then a bunch of other places report on it based on that one report. And we talk a lot about how you need to find actual good sources. Comic book news. What's the one I hate? Comic book
CBR. I don't.
CBR.
I think it's Reader is what the R is.
Yeah. But like they're a pretty bad example of the Screen Rant does this a lot, like where they'll find an article that like the New York Times posted and then they'll just retype that article, and then the only source they'll have for that is the New York Times. And if you go back to the New York Times article, you read all this other shit in it that you're like, well, this contradicts everything that they wrote in this other article. So anyway, always dig deeper into these things is what I'm saying, because as I'm sitting here thinking about this, that re-release concept in my head, and I know I'm not the only one talking about this, but I do think it came from probably just like one article that I read that did not clarify in it whether or not this was separate from the from the N64 add-on stuff from the online.
Right. So because there is a re-release as well. That's the thing. And the big fuck you of the whole thing is that they decided, oh, well, we can do the Nintendo Switch Online version at the same time as the re-release, which is a Xbox exclusive.
There it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I GoldenEye, and that like this is all very silly and weird from a historian perspective, because that's my only real attachment to GoldenEye. Is like I didn't play it when it first came out. That was not the kind of games that I played then. I didn't really get into the James Bond shooters until there was one on the GameCube that was like Fire by Night or some nonsense, like some really wild.
I know the game you're talking about, because it was a weird.
Really hard to recapture GoldenEye, but for everybody at the time, it just couldn't. But for me, who had never played GoldenEye, I fell in love with it, right? So there is like a James Bond game in my history that I do enjoy, and it's not GoldenEye. So I also find myself really lost in these conversations all the time when people start making like odd job jokes, because like I get them as a reference, but like I didn't earn my time with GoldenEye like everybody else in the world did. So like it's an important conversation because GoldenEye was so important as like a concept as a video game. So like I adore that it's getting all of this love, but I just can't. I'm not a part of this party. Like, it's,
Well, I mean, there's a James Bond game in my past that I don't enjoy, and it's GoldenEye, but it's still something that it coming back out. I mean, first of all, Game Pass got it for free. And as a subscriber to Game Pass, it's like, well, I want to play through GoldenEye again. And the other reason that I wanted to play through GoldenEye again, as I had said earlier, we share a Nintendo Switch Online family account. We're on the same sort of setup there. And neither one of us were like, is worth it to pay for these N64 games where they're janky by all accounts. Like, nobody has had a good experience with these games right when they roll out. Eventually it's fixed, but
just to make sure that we're hitting all of our bases, and I thought I was full of shit, but I still said it anyway. But man, the name of the game that I'm thinking of was 007 Nightfire.
Yeah, I knew there was a fire one. There's a bunch of ones that are not canon, to the story.
It wasn't a real. I mean, like man. Oh no, it was an Agent Under Fire. There was a whole bunch.
There's a bunch of fire ones. I mean, like it's.
Oh no! Now I got to play through a bunch of James Bond games to figure out which one is the one I liked. I think it might have been Agent Under Fire. Oh, I got to look at
Agent Under Fire is the blue cover. Right? Like, it's like a real nice
blue.
Oh, well, that doesn't help me at all.
Yeah, it doesn't help me at all. Yeah.
I could also think of, like, there's one that's white and red.
They're also both Pierce Brosnan. Well, From Russia with Love, they did do the From Russia with Love video game. Remember that?
Yeah, but then there's another one that, like, is a sequel to that because From Russia with Love did really well. I don't know.
I-
All I think of when I think of these games are they were on the shelves at the video store and I never played them. Because
we've talked about this before. I wasn't a big shooter guy when I was growing up, just period. So James Bond was the only thing that really kind of latched me on to like even playing Nightfire or Fire by Night, whichever one I ever played, like was because it was a James Bond game, not because it was a shooter. So like there was also that part to it. Also, it had a really good multiplayer, which was always something I was always into because we always had friends over the house, and me and Zach would play all the time. So any game that had a good multiplayer aspect to it was always gonna get me. Which you could say, well, didn't GoldenEye? Yes, but yeah. But the problem was that again, I wasn't playing shooters, and then by the time I was playing shooters, the James Bond game that was available to me is not the beloved historical like history making one that GoldenEye was. So I couldn't. But I just missed the boat on all of this.
I think in your defense and in a lot of people's defense, nobody was really into shooters before GoldenEye. GoldenEye was the game that really gave it its legs. Not saying that there weren't shooters like Doom
and things like that, but
right.
yeah.
But I mean on the console experience, Turok was a launch game for N64, and it got chewed up and spit out because of the interesting control scheme that people were not ready for. Some people absolutely fell in love with it, where you moved with the C buttons and aimed with the control stick. That was revolutionary as well. But there were people who got Turok, did not realize it was going to be a shooter A, and then B, did not understand the control scheme, and were not happy with it.
Well, because I think even to this day, people talk a lot about Turok as being Resident Evil with dinosaurs. That's more Dino Crisis.
That's Dino Crisis. Turok is Doom with dinosaurs.
Right, exactly. Like what it is actually the shooter with dinosaurs, and like they were promised something that was that kind of it's a weird Turok's a weird game. Like that's what I'm getting at. Is like people were just not ready for a lot of the weirdness in that game, not least of which this like shooter style. But as far as like in a 3D space available on a controller in your hands on a console, that's what GoldenEye broke ground on, right? Like that is what it defined, is like sitting on your couch with a controller in your hand, shooters in a 3D space.
Yes, but also what I was going to say, everybody who bought GoldenEye bought it for the James Bond aspect. Like the reason why I was able to get that groundswell, the reason why I had it in this house was because of James Bond. My father and mother got that for me for Christmas because, it's James Bond. And then, like, I played it, and it was so different because I was growing up playing shooters. Like, I played Wolfenstein, I played Doom on my PC. But the difference between Wolfenstein, Doom, and GoldenEye, and the other notable thing that it brought to the gaming space, was GoldenEye had objectives that you need to complete in order to finish the level. Where Doom and Wolfenstein, it's just get to the end of the stage.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue the keys. Your objective is to get to keys to then get out. But
it's different in terms of like.
They're not as narratively interesting or weighty or fleshed out in the way like GoldenEye is a deeper experience than those two games. And part of that is the benefit of coming from a known IP, is that they can lean on references to the movie, they can lean on references to the character, they can do that, and it really fleshes out the world. Like lo and behold, there's a reason why video game companies really like going to known IPs to make video games. It's because a lot of the groundwork is already laid for both them as the creator, but also for you as the audience, right? GoldenEye just was a much deeper experience than Wolfenstein or Doom ever could have imagined being. But again, part of that is also the graphics, right?
Well, not really. If you really look at it, like it's better 3D graphics, but. Is it? I don't know. GoldenEye, I never liked GoldenEye growing up because I got stuck in the train level, and I'm not inside baseball for this episode of the Stay Report. We started late, and partially the reason we started late is that I was stuck in the train level again, and it's like I just need to finish it. I can't continue to be stuck in this level. And is it when you say stuck in the train level, like is it like a mechanics thing, like you're just like I can't do this, or is there like a glitchy weird effect of like, hey, I don't seem to be able to like block in these moments or something? So it's a mechanic thing. You have to use his little watch laser from GoldenEye in order to cut out a panel to escape through the bottom of the train, and it has never worked right for me. I think the issue with it, playing around with it this morning, is where you're supposed to aim to cut through the metal is different for each piece of metal. Because they at least show you, like, there are bolts you're supposed to cut through, but I'll aim right for the middle of it, and it won't cut through it. And then I'll aim a little above the middle, and it'll cut through, or I'll aim a little below the middle, and it will cut through. So it's one of those situations where, like, the cool thing would be if you get it into position and move it slowly across all the things, like how James Bond does it in the movie. But in practice, it doesn't work that way. And the other issue that I've always had with it is you're going to duck down to go through it once you cut it away, and the detection for them having to duck down James to go through the hole activates whether or not that door is there or not. So you're constantly going from standing to ducking, which just adds another layer to it. Now, I might sound like an idiot. I might be like admitting like this problem that I've had. But I mean, as a kid, it was one of those situations where I'm like, this is annoying me. And it's a level that is not short. And it comes right after a level that was really short. So it's one of these things where you have to go through the level. You have to prevent Natalia, the female lead from GoldenEye, from being killed. And then you have a minute to escape from the train and then get away from the train before it explodes. Because I've cut through with like 2 seconds left, and I'm like, perfect, I'm good. And then the train explodes, and I'm too close to it, and I die. So it's just weird. It's like this really difficult moment in the game, even on like Agent or Secret Agent, where like things are not made harder. Really, though, Secret Agent and 00 Agent, all they do is add more objectives. But this one moment, and they're trying to do something interesting, and it's just sort of being held back by the limitations of the hardware that's there.
Yeah, I mean, the hardware and the understanding of how to layer that shit on top of each other. Like, we've gotten better at giving those types of like layered objectives to beef up, like, you know, concepts and parts of games that you don't feel like this is impossible. Like, you want to feel like, oh, you know, failing is part of playing video games, but you want to feel when you fail that like you understand why you failed and you won't make that mistake again, right? And if you find yourself stuck in that loop, that can be so discouraging. Like, even on the most popular games, and I mean, like, for me, like, one of my big like admissions in that department has to be something like Resident Evil 4. When it first came out, I couldn't play that game specifically past the first encounter with the chainsaw dude. Like, I just was never able to figure out how to do that sort of stuff. And it wasn't until controller scheme stuff got better later on, and like there was change ups for that, but also I got better at playing video games. Also, just understanding like how to read what you're supposed to do in those moments, right? Because one of those things that you're describing, for me in that moment, is like they layer all this objectives on, and you talk about the limitations of the hardware, like, if they can't clearly mark where that stuff is, that can really like get you. Because like I had the same problem playing Mass Effect 2, is there was only one mission in the entire game that I failed, one loyalty mission that I failed, and it pisses me off because I got everybody else's. But what happened was I couldn't figure out how to follow the mechanic that they wanted me to do. I was like sneaking behind a dude and had to sneak up in the rafters while he was going through doors underneath. And at some point he went through a door, and there was no way forward for me. And I don't know if I was supposed to drop down. I don't know what I was supposed to do, but it's timed. You have all of this shit. They've layered all this other stuff on that you're supposed to be doing at the same time. And it just wasn't clear to me what I was supposed to be doing. And I failed out of that mission. And like, it was just like, man, this kind of killed. This is a bummer, because I didn't fail because of my own inadequacy as a player, or like something that I've learned that I can do better next time. I legitimately don't know why I can't do this. And that is such a bummer feeling to have when you're playing a video game.
Yeah. I agree, but I got through it. I got through the trade, and then I got through a couple more things. I was in the control, and I couldn't get the fight to trigger. I don't know what I was doing wrong there. So I tried that for 5 more minutes before I came down.
That sounds like we'll have to look deeper into that.
Yeah.
Because, do you know that GoldenEye has been released like 5 times on Nintendo products?
Yeah. Because it's had like the Wii release, and it had a Wii remake release as well. Did it ever come to Wii U?
GoldenEye Reloaded, which seems like that was an Xbox 360 version, and then eventually Rogue Agent, which is like the weird like sequel to GoldenEye they try to make, right?
Yeah, I remember that one. It came with a golden controller for the Wii. But then I bought it at Big Lots for $4.
Nice.
10 years
Yeah.
after it came out. So
Yeah.
that there's that. It wasn't received particularly well. I mean, it's just one of those situations. But then the other thing that I do want to talk about, because I've been seeing it everywhere, is that they are different. The N64 version on Nintendo Switch and the one on Game Pass are very different. And
Interesting.
some people have said, like, are you playing? I'm like, yeah, I'm having a good time with it. I mean, it finally feels like a modern shooter, which is nice. Using the two sticks to move and aim. I'm having that stuff. It was that train thing. It was like, oh, well, with aiming, this shouldn't be a problem. And it was still, I don't know where I'm supposed to aim to cut these. And it took me 3 tries to get through.
It just like pulls you out of the moment. It just like you're so removed from what's going on because you're like, I can't figure out what my fingers are not doing right here. What's happening?
Well, especially it's like I've been able to aim at everything else and do well up to this point, because it's like the 17th is not the 17th. It's the 14th mission of the game. So you've been playing for a while when you get to the train level.
Wild.
You should understand what you're supposed to do.
They ever make a James Bond Jr. video game? They must have.
They
right?
did. It's
For,
on
like,
Super
Game Boy
Nintendo.
or something. No, Super Nintendo. Yeah.
Speaking of Game Boy, though, the 007 game for Game Boy is fantastic, and everybody should play it. Download a ROM. I don't care. I'll advocate for that. Sale that's the
That's
seven
the one that's
Cs.
just like James Bond 007, right? Like,
I think it's
no
007 James
subtitle.
Bond. It doesn't have a
okay,
subtitle or anything like that. Yeah. But really is Link's Awakening, but with James Bond.
Interesting.
Like it's a James Bond story, but you know, it's assigned something to B, something to A. It's top down sort of exploration, and it's a good time. I beat that. I'm probably going to play through that game again once I finish GoldenEye, where I'm in the control, so I think I'm 2 levels away from it, and I couldn't get that fight.
I don't want us to sound like a couple of grumpy old dudes that are like, it's not GoldenEye. Don't play it. It's just like, I don't know. It's like they're making such a huge deal out of the availability of GoldenEye on the emulator, at least on the Switch, right? And like I don't know. It's not enough to bring us back, right? Like we clearly.
Well, I mean, I'm playing it on Game Pass.
No, right?
Yeah,
it's
so
clearly not enough for us to buy in on that extra $25 a year or whatever the fuck it is.
I don't even know what it is. All I know is that for us to have a family plan is $30 a year, right. And that is more than enough for me. I do not need to pay more, especially. I want to own the booster pack for Mario Kart 8, because God forbid they decide to take that down, and then I have to buy it anyway, right? Because they've already demonstrated that the things that you get from the expansion part of Nintendo Switch Online are not always going to be available. Like, they've shown that. So
right. No, we've learned a lot over the last 15 years about how we don't own anything anymore as far as digital.
Right, exactly.
Right, they're concerned. Yeah.
But still, so like given the two, like they could say, "Oh, sorry, I know that we're Nintendo and we own it, but the booster pass for Mario Kart 8 is not up there anymore." And it's like, well, then I should have just bought the booster pass from the beginning.
Yeah,
you got me, Nintendo.
Let me put it this way: if they ever pull the booster pass down from that availability, it'll probably be for a big enough reason that it won't be available to anybody that bought it either.
That's unless they're trying to get people to spend the money.
Unless it is a purely financial decision on their
part, which
is
not out of the realm for Nintendo. So. But yeah, it's like and Nintendo 64 games, and I had a Nintendo 64, but I was not into Nintendo 64 at the same level that I ever was like NES or SNES or even GameCube. Like N64, because it was the birth of that new 3D technology, and like none of the stuff played as well as I wanted to. It's the same stuff where like I've beaten Ocarina of Time. I beat it when it came out, but like there was nothing there to make me go back and play it. Not like Link to the Past where I'm like, I'm going to beat this every Sunday while Mom's at work. Like, that's just how I'm going to pass the time. So it's...
we've talked about N64 was a huge system for me and my brother. I mean, between like Donkey Kong 64, Ocarina of Time, I mean, Mario Golf 64, like that stuff, like... defined like a lot of my early video gaming time, as well as the Super Nintendo and stuff as well too. And you know, we had a PlayStation that we did not have as many games for, but I played my Tomb Raiders, I played my Crash Bandicoots on that, right? Like so I we did have a pretty solid like 3D kind of toe in the water as it was in our house. Maybe that's what it is like I don't know. I love the N64. It's just that I love the N64, but it's in an unfortunate place in technical history, like like graphics specifically history, that I just I don't think you can go back to it like you can like the 16-bit and the 8-bit stuff, right? Like the going back to the nostalgic 16-bit character stuff that we went through a few years ago, like, and you know that's going to persist now going forward because it is such a good like well standout style. I just don't have that same love personally for anything in like the PlayStation and 64 era.
Yeah, it
And I
just
know that we kind of, at least like I'm thinking of specifically in like indie video games, right? Like we did get to a point where a lot of indie video game makers have that did grow up on those styles, have started to make some indie video games there. So there's like a good handful of PlayStation 1 style, PlayStation 2 style, like indie horror games or you know, N64 style collect 'em all games that come out as like $20 releases on the Switch and stuff like that. Like they are out there. But I just don't think that they've got the same nostalgic audience guarantee that the second you put something out in 16-bit, people just gush all over, you know?
yeah, I don't know. And also like those collectathons, it's the genre and the gameplay that's coming back. It's not the graphics. Like
Yeah.
Ukulele tried to look like a modern game with the N64 style. Like
Yeah, or the other one that I want to start giving more credit to because I just did not like Ukulele. I did not even like their like second attempt when they were like, "What if we make it side scrolling?" Still didn't work, guys. But the other one that I've recently like I want to say stumbled onto, but it's always been there. I just never gave it a shot. Was A Hat in Time, and it's actually a fucking delight. But yeah, like they're purposely like trying to emulate like style of gameplay but not graphics, right? Like you're totally right there. There are definitely games that are trying to emulate those graphics though. It's just that you're not seeing it interestingly to your point, like you're not seeing it at the higher level, right? You're seeing it more from like guys on Steam putting up like tech demos and stuff like that than you are from some company that's willing to put out like a physical release of a game. But 16-bit and all that sort of shit, like you see that all the time, like getting like all of the attention from the big wigs, right? So I think that is more to the point where like there's something about this era of graphics that just doesn't carry forward in the same way, and maybe it's just because of the ways in which we consumed it or something. I don't know. It just doesn't hold up in the ways that some of that other stuff does. And like I say that and then I immediately think, well, maybe that's just for me. But then I look at the landscape of the things that are just like being made and coming out and what's succeeding and what's not. And I'm not seeing stuff that's emulating PlayStation 1 graphics at the top of the charts for anybody.
yeah. And then what I'm realizing is I always thought that it was the graphics that was the hurdle that I was trying to get over for certain games like this, but also it's maybe I just don't like games where I have to run around and collect things in a 3D space. Maybe that's not for me, because I tried Super Lucky's Tale and New Super Lucky's Tale, which is the same game, but I weirdly like graphically. I think maybe it changes a little bit down the line, but I've only really done the first two levels of each of those. And I'm like, this isn't fun for me. So like I blamed it on the graphics, but also I think another part of it was the fact that I'm just not into this right now. This isn't what I'm interested in when it comes to playing games.
Yeah, I really do have a good space in my heart for a good collectible, and I say that knowingly because I go back at least once every year or two to play Spyro games. Like I sometimes I play all three, sometimes I just play two because it's my favorite. But like I will sit down and pound through like a Spyro run sometime because I have that itch for a good collectible and just haven't found a different game that really fits that. The only other real game in that landscape that really ever did it for me was Conker's Bad Fur Day, and I have no access to that game.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I want to go play the Donkey Kong Country games, and those are
Yeah.
kind of collect them all. But I think it works better for me in the 2D space where it's like there's a course and you'll find the stuff along the course. Granted, in the 3D thing, it's the same thing. It's just bigger, and I always feel like, oh man, like I might just be missing it by like one little voxel, as it were.
Yeah.
But the last thing to say about GoldenEye is that distinction between the fact that the Game Pass is an HD reskinned one with redone controls, and you can play multiplayer local co-op. The Switch one, the controls are apparently awful. Nobody is enjoying the controls for it. There's been at least 4 videos I've seen on YouTube of how to actually fix the controls to make the game playable, which that sounds like fun, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And they can play online with each other, which is an interesting little wrinkle. So there's no definitive version of the GoldenEye re-release, which is
the
been
online play
interesting.
not being available for the Xbox, but then being available for the N64, but that's not the one anybody wants to play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if eventually the Xbox version were going to come to Nintendo Switch, which is what you thought, that'd be something else, right? The game should be able to run it, and it's not like all the graphics are redone. It's still the janky, sort of vaguely Pierce Brosnan. I got to kill Famke Jensen's character, Xenia Onatop, today, and I'm like, I would have never known based on this game that it was Famke Jensen who played this role. Never.
But that's I also would not expect that.
No, exactly. But that's,
yeah.
But I'm saying that in '97, that's how they did it. And it's not as if the reskinning and the up-resing has made them look any better. And it's kind of nice because that charm of it is there. But what I do like is that I can aim with the other stick while moving with the stick and feel like I'm in control. The only places that it's fumbled is still in that laser puzzle, which again, that could just be my own personal hangups from when I was a child. Just coming forward. Learned trauma, kind of. I made it harder on myself. And then the other one is that whenever you're driving a tank, because you used to be able to, if you aim, you're not moving in the same direction as the tank, and it's very difficult because that wasn't possible on the N64 because you would always recenter to the front of the tank when you were no longer aiming.
Right.
So that was a weird thing. I ended up doing that level on foot, and that was fun. I beat it under the time to get the cheats unlocked, so I had a good time with it.
Nice.
But it's an interesting thing to play this game again, and it's that reminder of I didn't really care for this game. I got it as a gift. I do remember the slumber parties where guys would come over and we would play GoldenEye all with each other, and it would be fun that way until a fist fight broke out, and then we'd start playing NWO or WCW wrestling game.
Nice.
But it is interesting, and the thing I do, it is, because I've had people contacting me how are you playing this on Nintendo Switch? I'm like, oh, I'm not. Why would I be playing it on Nintendo Switch? Why would I pay? I know that I'm paying a premium to have it on Game Pass, but also I'm working through 2 other games on Game Pass right now, so it's different.
Yeah, I mean, and we'd be paying a premium to play it on Switch, so that's
right, exactly.
No different. Right.
Well, that's the thing is that so they're paying a premium to play a lesser product is the only way that I can look at it.
Yeah.
And it's strange. I don't know.
But there's a reason why the re-release of GoldenEye has not completely once again changed the landscape of gaming. That's the other side of all of this is you and I talking about this. This is the most that I have talked about GoldenEye with anybody or even engaged with as far as media is concerned with GoldenEye in a long time.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the fact that I'm playing it is one thing. It went early live. It went live early because it was January 27th, and then they just kind of pushed the button on the 26th. They did a worldwide release, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. So being able to play it early, it felt good to get it out of the way. And then I'm like, you know what? I want to complete it. I got halfway through the game. I'm going to complete it. And I'm seeing everybody talk about it. People that I don't even talk about video games with are like, oh man, GoldenEye. I'm going to play GoldenEye. And I'm just like, yeah, that's going to be fun for you. Cause I think you're going to be a little disappointed. It is undeniable that game changed the landscape of gaming and is one of the reasons why FPS games are the #1 game in the world right now.
Yeah.
but it's still a 20-plus-year-old game. So do what you can with that knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, but like we talk about that shit, but like the second biggest games in the world right now are FIFA games, and like notoriously, even with new releases, those are the same games that they were 20 years ago. Like, there's something about how like there's some of this stuff that people just latch onto, and that's just what they want, and we are discovering that they want it kind of for the rest of their lives. Like, and if there's a way to repackage it and get it to them, like these companies are going to figure this out. And like, on the one hand, I start to feel like at some point are we stunting like other things that these companies, these people could be working on to advance this stuff. Like imagine a new James Bond game that would come out and actually like take advantage. Like when's the last time that we had a James Bond video game that came out that really like spoke to people? And I think From Russia with Love was kind of interesting, because that's the one that when they did it, they used Connery and they modeled Connery like in it and all of that, and like there was a lot of conversation about the ways that they were going to make From Russia with Love come to life. And like it kind of puttered out and went nowhere. It didn't really do much, but at least there was like conversation around a James Bond game, a new James Bond game, and like I'd like to see that again, because as I pointed out, like there's been James Bond games like left, right, and center. Like James Bond has been a staple of video game like IP as long as video games have existed. Like there's been a James Bond game. So like why are we not leaning into this character and using it to do more cool shit in the future? Like why do we just keep latching onto this one game with this GoldenEye and like not doing anything more interesting with it?
Yeah, imagine if that happened with like Zelda, because like people all have their Zelda, but you're still willing to play other Zelda games. The weird thing about
what they did was they just kept re-releasing like Zelda 1, and like every now and then you got like, oh, we put Wind Waker out. Oh, nobody likes the graphics. All right, well here's 5 more years of us just re-releasing Zelda 1 to make up for it.
Okay. It's I don't know why everybody latched onto GoldenEye in this way. That I mean, it's part of that 1997 like just blood in the water. Because it's that same sort of thing with, like, Symphony of the Night, Ocarina of Time, Resident Evil 2. Like, everybody always compares the Resident Evil games to Resident Evil 2. Yeah. Which is crazy. Because, like, that game, that's not a good game by, like, modern standards.
No, but eventually they break out when they get Resident Evil 4, and that becomes the thing for a while, and then that broke out until they had Resident Evil 7, and that became the thing for a while. Like there's at least an evolution, right, to the Resident Evil games that you can follow that can say that like, well, yeah, they are changing, learning, and creating new cool stuff, and then it's fun to go back, because it's fun to go back and see all the differences between those games, or with these re-releases, seeing how they're like using those games to inform one another, right? Because the re-releases of 2 and 3, and I cannot imagine it'll be much different for what we see in 4, are so heavily informed by what they learned making 7 and then 8, right? Like, so there's something really cool about that, about what's going on there, and it's just not happening for these 007 games, and that's just such a shame, because there's so many ones that are out there, right, that people could be holding up and going back to, that are decent enough games. Plus you have one of the most important games of all time in GoldenEye, plus you have like just the potential for future IP, because I mean there's always going to be movies, there's more books, there's all of this shit that you could do with James Bond, and just to not see it being utilized in any fun way by any known video game creator out there is disappointing. Like it's a shame, because the more and more that we have this conversation, the more I realize how much there has always been a 007 game out there, and like the fact that there's not been more than one that we really reference is unfortunate.
Well, I think one of the other big things about it, not that I want to talk about GoldenEye this whole episode, it's what's been on my mind. Literally, it's what I was doing before I was in front of the microphone, is having Rare be the creative studio behind the James Bond game was the other like brilliant thing. Because there's this moment in the level that I'm stuck in the control where James is like, I'm gonna clear out the space and then I'll come get you. You stay in the lift. And knowing that it's a British company that wrote it, like they understand the language of James Bond and it doesn't feel like weird or forced that he said that. And then her reaction when you come back, like, that was wonderful, James. Like, it's like they understand how he's supposed to talk. Like, it's not just
Yeah.
the gameplay that works in this game, but it's also the world that they construct around that gameplay. And I honestly was not expecting that to be my takeaway of playing it again.
Well,
And
and part of that comes from the history of James Bond itself, where especially in the 90s and 2000s, there's a lot of stuff around the shall we say, Americanization of James Bond. And lo and behold, once they stop using the Ian Fleming stories and start writing like new movie like stories for James Bond, it becomes like action movie style Americanized like stuff that a lot of purists in the Bond community don't love, right? And it's interesting that that is also then when the video games really start lately, they're churning out all these different games that are just going nowhere because they are just a bunch of reskinned formulaic shooters, like for first person shooters, right? And nothing is moving the dial like GoldenEye did. So there's also that whole aspect to it too. Like when you talk about how they understand the language of Bond, yeah, like as a British company getting to do this British hero, which is not the way that we think about James Bond anymore, or didn't, I guess, until we gave it back to the Brits to make the Daniel Craig ones.
I mean, it blows my mind that James Bond movies are huge moneymakers over in Britain and the UK. Like, I never really considered that, but then, like, when I started watching the Big Fat Quiz of Everything, and it would be like, what was the number one movie in the box office this year? And if there was a James Bond movie, is always that movie. And then it's like, well, of course it is. He's their hero.
Yeah. He's their Captain America, right? Like,
Yeah,
he's
like,
their, yeah.
well, yes. That's a crazy statement. There's your title of the episode, folks. James Bond is Britain's Captain America.
How is that crazy? He's an over-the-top like action hero that represents the country manifested, made flesh. Like he's.
It is just James Bond is their Captain America is one of those situations where like there has to be something fundamentally un-American about the character. It's not wrong. It is a perfect comparison of the two, but then like to call James Bond Captain America, you've already failed. Because he can't be the same. Like,
why?
What? Because of some of the things that Captain America stands for that James Bond would never stand for. If that makes sense.
Like, such as?
Like, I don't know. It hit my
like,
ear really weird. It's like
the idea being that Captain America stands for America, right? But then when America starts to do shit wrong, think about the movies. We'll just talk about the MCU. We won't even get into the comics. But like in that, the ways in which I have always adored this whole thing where he stands for this idealistic version of America that he holds true, not the America as it exists in the movies, because the America as it exists in the movies is run by Hydra. Let's talk about where the strings are being pulled, right? So he has to break from America in order to maintain what he sees as an idealistic America, and that is why Captain America is this really interesting character to watch, is because he's not just this mascot for the United States. Think about how many times James Bond ends up having to like go after like higher ups that have been corrupted and like are not representative of the British government, and people are like, "Oh, are you sure about this? You're taking on the British government." He's like, "Yeah, but not like my government." Like that happens all the time for him. Like there's all of this idea that he represents this idealistic version of what that we want spies at that level to be doing in order to take care of us, right? Like we want them to, when they realize they've got to pull the ripcord and like go after people that otherwise look like they are these national heroes, like he does that. Like, and it's not, I'm not saying any of this is good storytelling. This is not a judgment call, but like the stories in which we talk about James Bond, the spy story, like hold that up against something like Winter Soldier, which is literally made to be this like spy story action movie. Like Winter Soldier could just be a James Bond movie. You could have made that a James. You basically had GoldenEye. like that is it is like they are cut from the same cloth. They just represent two very different like ideals and worlds and backgrounds.
I got you. It's just to call James Bond Captain America, I think is where it is, because he's like, well, no, he's Captain UK.
Well, yes, obviously. Okay, so he's Captain Britain, which is already another character.
There's already another character, so it already falls
issue was
apart.
just with the vocabulary, because I didn't call him like Captain
No,
Bond.
no, I'm like, that's where it hit the ear weird. And then, like, yes, you did a beautiful extrapolation of what you meant. That is 100% true. It was just like the fact of, like, yeah, James Bond's their Captain America. Ooh, no, Captain America is their Captain America because they would throw their empty tea mugs at Captain America. They would never do that with James Bond.
Yes.
Like, there's an inherent
So
representation
the sentence
thing.
that I was saying, Devin,
Oh my
just to teach you how
God.
the syntax works, is that Captain America is to America what James Bond is to Britain.
There we go. Let's go SAT on this bitch.
That's usually how metaphors like work, but I didn't understand. You didn't understand how metaphors.
I thought you were
work.
literally comparing the two characters, and
What? I mean,
I don't know. I'm
was.
sorry.
I don't understand what you're caught on.
I don't know. I don't understand. I mean, I get it now. You explained it to me, but in the moment, I didn't understand it. Like, I didn't take it as a if-then statement. What else are we talking about? What have you been up to? What are we besides GoldenEye? Let's move away from GoldenEye. This has been too James Bondian.
I'm so I don't know. I tried to start off by talking about Mass Effect.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry about. Well, yeah, talk about Mass Effect.
Played so like. But it isn't this episode of the Say Report unless Devin goes negative for the first 30 minutes.
Where was I negative there? I was trying to be positive about GoldenEye.
You were not positive about GoldenEye. I encourage you to go back and listen to the last 30 minutes and tell me how you were positive about GoldenEye.
Okay. I was trying to be. I was like, even though I'm not a big
apologize
fan,
to the
I don't.
GoldenEye community.
Okay, cool. What's up with Mass Effect? What is your space racism?
Yeah,
Spacism.
So, I mean, I've been diving into. I've just because we've got the Mass Effect Legendary Edition for free, right?
Yep.
And since then, I have been rebought it on Steam as well because there is some stuff that as I was playing through the PlayStation version, I was just like, man, this is just not the stuff that I had heard about, right? We had talked about this before, where like there's some things going on here that are just not quite what I understood this game to be, and I thought it was just me at first until I started looking into some of that stuff, some of that controversy that had been coming up, because I just wanted to know. I wanted to know what I was supposed to be looking for in this regard, because the other side of that is I was also talking about how I was not loving some of the metagame experience of playing through this overarching story that at the time was spread across 3 games and a decade's worth of development and all of this, but now here it is available to me to play in like 60 hours if I want. And like that, so trying to really kind of break through and figure out exactly what it was about this game, because there are parts of this game that I have just been falling in love with, but there's also parts of this game that have just been not well done. Like I was having in Mass Effect 2, which right now out of the 3, I'm about 10 hours into Mass Effect 3, so I've only got a little bit of time in that one under my belt, but considering that I only was putting 30 hours into the other 2, that does put me a third of the way through possibly my experience with that game. So I'm just looking at all of this, and 2 really is the standout, and like it really is like a phenomenal example of an RPG of the time and things like that, possibly one of the greatest RPGs of all time, if you forgive some of its sins that could have possibly just been because of the time it was made. But I was like, I need to look into this. I need to see what it was that was going on at the time with this game that was really sticking for everybody, because it's not quite hitting for me in this area, and it is working for me in these areas, and I've never understood or heard any of this. So like, what is going on in this game? And it's because the Legendary Edition, like, first of all, the Legendary Edition contains all of the cleaned up works later on, right? Like, and that's obvious. That's what, obviously they're using definitive versions of them and all that. Plus they've done some work to clear up the graphics and all of that too. And the DLC is all built in and all of that too, right? But that does also mean that they're the censored versions that eventually came out. Like, so one of the big things that they did with Mass Effect 2 and in one of the big cleanups is that they removed all of the gratuitous butt shots of a specific female character. The female
I have to ask one question about that, though. Are there other gratuitous butt shots, just not of that one character?
So yeah, so what I was about to say is that the female bodies in Mass Effect have always been a point of contention. There is really only one body type. It is rounded in ways that people question. I mean, it's the movie poster problem of like, hey, you've airbrushed the hips out of this woman, right? Like that kind of stuff, like where you're like a body doesn't move in that way. And when 70% of the bodies on screen are not supposed to be human, it becomes a really sticky conversation. But there's still, a good number of human characters on screen that have those same body shapes and movements. So like you can't use that excuse, guys, because you're clearly using like a pretty standard model for female bodies across the board, and it is a gratuitous model. And then on top of that, the camera work. It is definitely questionable in a lot of moments. A lot of focusing on cleavage, a lot of focusing on butts, comments made in the dialogue. So like this is not on accident or anything like that. Like there's stuff built into the Mass Effect oeuvre that unfortunately focuses on female bodies in really male gazy ways. And it was called out for this to the point where they went in and they removed, specifically to your question, Devin, this one character's gratuitous butt shots. And that sounds like, well, why do they focus on this one character? Let's say that there were 100 butt shots in this game. Yeah, there's definitely gratuitous butt shots of a lot of different people, and that would maybe make up 12. That still leaves like 88 butt shots that are of this one character.
Okay.
It was, I should say, over the top. And I didn't know this because I'm not playing that version that when it came out, or dealing with it being patched out and all, or cleaned up, or all of that stuff, right? And the only real reason I'm finding out about this is because part of my research is also diving into the mod community. Knowing what's going on in the mod community with these games is always really interesting to me, because it's it's basically looking at specifically what fans want enough to either learn to code or to pay for somebody to code things into the games for them, right? And, simple stuff like easy gain of XP, or like more hairstyle options, the character creator. Like that's pretty much a lot of the stuff across the board. But you do run into those ones where it's like, restore the butt shots, restore the Miranda butt shots, like use this one to restore the original butt shots. And it's just like, you assholes. like wow. So it's not that they remove the game's like focus on this like sexuality entirely, right? But there is definitely a less of it than there was when it first came out. And so like it's really interesting, because that just kind of highlights all of the stuff across the board that's really different about this version of the game that I'm playing. But there is still some weird stuff in there, in that like, there's some weird dialogue where one of the big things about BioWare RPGs that used to get called out a lot, and I think still happens, but the dialogue option that you pick and the words that are put there is not necessarily what your character is going to say, nor necessarily the tone in which they're going to say it. So like picking an option, an answer to a question sometimes, and then your character does something that is kind of not what you expected them to do, and that happens. The deeper you get into the larger dialogue trees, the more and more that sort of stuff happens. And the reason that is because they want to try and incorporate events as they've occurred in your version of the game that aren't necessarily going to happen in everybody's version. If I talk to a person before I go to the main support hub, that person's going to say something at the end of their sentence of like, hey, by the way, you should go check out the main support hub since we haven't been there yet. But if I've already been, they won't say that anymore. Right? Same goes for your character. If you have been to a place yet, and then you talk to a character, you might reference that place you've been. But if you haven't been there, that reference isn't going to happen. But the problem is that it starts to bleed into the relationships, because the ways in which you behave in one place can affect the ways that characters feel about you. If you treat humans better, certain human characters will like you more, certain alien characters won't. You treat aliens better, vice versa, right? And the ways in which you react to some of the people, or people react to what you've just said to them, is weird and out of place, because there's only so much you can
incorporate into that. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So people just react in weird ways to things. I was talking to a woman for like 10 minutes going through all these different dialogue options, and then I go to walk away from her, and my character, after talking to her for 10 minutes and getting all of this background on what's going on, my character had the nerve to say to her, well, I guess if you don't want to talk to me right now, I guess I'll just leave you alone. And I'm like, the fuck? She's been talking to me for 20 minutes. What do you mean she doesn't want to talk to us? What does that even mean? And her character got snippy back at me, and now every time they talk to each other, they're like snippy with each other. And I was like, I thought we were friends. I didn't get any indication that we weren't that we were not friends, and now suddenly I guess we're not. And I think it's not because of the conversation specifically we were having, but because of other events in the world have led to her not like somewhere on that sliding scale, we are not friends. We are frenemies or something, right? Like we're not complete enemies. She has not left the ship, but at the same time, she is not my friend. So there's this weird attitude to our conversations now because of that. But I am not sure why we're not friends. The conversation we had like seemed pretty civil, and other than that I don't talk to them much. So maybe it's like that we just haven't gotten to know each other enough yet. I don't know what, but it really kind of, it really fucks with you. And then you start to have all these weird things about like, well, isn't that what some humans actually do? And it's like, no, 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 this is not fair. Like this game pretty much lays out like, if you behave in this way, people will treat you this way. And then they want to throw you a curveball with a character not behaving that way. They really need to justify it. And these dialogue options are not justifying the ways that some people are behaving with me now 3 games in, right? So there's like stuff like that I'm just not loving, but I'm also finding things that are like, fix the dialogue trees, consistency issues, like, and all of these mods that I was finding. So I was like, I need this on a PC because I need to see what's going on. And that's when I entered a whole other world of hurt. Like, luckily, it was only like $7. And I say luckily, but I am enjoying my time with it still. So, like, I would have paid the $25 price or whatever it is. But it was on sale for $7 for the holidays. So I grabbed it on Steam. And that allowed me to start looking into, like, actually installing some of the mods and some of the ways that it originally was and things like that. And on top of the fact that the PlayStation version is using very specific versions of it, the reason it is because otherwise that game is broken ass jank. I got the PC version of it, and I don't like it is like people are talking and their mouths aren't moving, characters are like disappearing from scenes, like it's just wild the amount of jank. And I've had some jank in the PlayStation version because, as I mentioned, I had that whole like loyalty mission that went sideways for me because I couldn't figure out how I was supposed to enter a room where this character was, and it's like on a timer, and I'm watching the 10-second timer go down, and it's like, if you don't get into that room and stop him from killing that man, you this mission is a loss. And like, and the other side of that is I also wasn't putting as much pressure on myself as I guess I should have, because usually when you lose in Mass Effect, it says like critical mission failure, and you can restart from a certain place. And I didn't understand that there are some missions, it had never happened to me in any other mission. There are some missions you can't restart. Failure state is the now state of that mission going forward, and that has never happened to me before or since. It was the only time this happened.
So
like I also
my
got caught
question
by
there is that something that is coded to fail? Have you found any proof that it is something that you can succeed at?
Yes, because there are playthroughs of that game where that character's loyalty is one, and you
Gotcha.
do. So like I have not gone out and looked up, like, because I also, part of this is also like, I'm far, the reason that I'm willing to do this on my PC now is because I'm in 3, so I'm willing to go back to 1 on my PC and not ruin kind of my like immersion and experience, because I also don't want to like completely fuck up my understanding of this narrative before we get to the end. It's already got a lot of baggage coming along with it. I don't need to provide any more. So I'm trying to make sure that I finish something pretty solidly before I go back and retry stuff. So for that particular failure state, I haven't gotten to retry it yet. I'm going to definitely and see if I can win it in some way. I have not looked up like what a success looks like, because I don't want to ruin that in some way. But like I do know that character's loyalty mission can be succeeded, and that character can survive. It's just like, it just didn't for me. Like, and so I kind of had to just build it into my head canon that like, yeah, no, we failed on this one, and I fucked up, and I'll lose this character now because of it. Like, that's just part of my Shepard's story in this particular version. And like, I'm not happy I had to do that, but like that's the way that I've had to kind of wrap my head around it and not think, man, this game fucked me. but like I could think that, right? But this is, take that and multiply it by 100 for the PC release. The PC port of the Legendary Edition of Mass Effect is fucking weirdly broken in like, not an unplayable, but definitely a way in which, if the PC version was the version I got a hold of, I don't think I would have given it even half the time that I've given it on the PlayStation. So they are making these hardline decisions on the console release version, basically, as far as I can tell, is to just make sure it works. And because of that, there's particular versions of what I'm playing in the PlayStation version that may not match up with what I understand this game to have been. Because you have to remember, Mass Effect was also that one game that got called out by conservative media for allowing same-sex relationships.
Mm-hmm.
and like got like pulled from some shelves, and like Walmart didn't carry it for a while and things like that because it got called out for all of this stuff. And then it came to light that like that is buried so deep in the game, and you have to go look at like it's really interesting because like the way that it was presented was like this game is smut, right? Like that's the way that this conservative writer, one person specifically, wrote about it, and so conservative media picked up on it and was like, yeah, this game is promoting this and blah 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 and all this shit. And like people lost their their shit about that because you're selling this to unsuspecting children. But then when it kind of came to fruition, when actual video game journalists got it in their hands and played it, that those moments are so deeply like in down the tree, like you have to go looking for that sort of stuff, essentially, right? I And so that's kind of where it all fell at the time, and that's why Mass Effect was able to still kind of keep the train rolling and became the big success that it was, and didn't get just wiped out by controversy in its first moments. But like there is some of that stuff that was also kind of cleaned up and removed, and there's a lot of mods out there available to restore like same-sex relationships or same-sex flirtation options and things like that. Like there is a lot of that stuff that was kind of compromised out, like it was censored out in later patches and versions of that are just not available to me now. So like so again, there's other things about like, oh, also don't forget to romance this character, and it's like, sure doesn't feel like I can get romantic with this character, and it's because some of the dialogue options have been changed.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's a game that didn't interest me anyway because of the nature of this is a big, growing, expanding story, and we're going to go multi-platform with the second one. Yeah. Which already that's well, like, well, that seems to defeat the purpose a little bit.
Really interesting. I kind of want to just play 2 just on its own, because the way, do you know how they get around that? They do like a comic book style recap of the first game. They give you the option to do this. This is not something you have to do, but they give you like a comic book style recap of the first game with the important choices still available to you. So if you've got like 15 minutes, like you sit through this like comic book retelling of the first game, and at key moments you make decisions, and those decisions are the ones that they use to then like fold into this to the second game. And that I have seen, because I was like, I had to know how they covered their asses if you hadn't played the first one. And so when I saw that, I actually think that the truncated version of the first game, with you making these kind of like choose your own adventure style choices, which is all this really is in the long run anyway, right? Actually kind of made the opening of 2 make so much more sense. Because remember, the last time we talked about it, I was saying it felt like they just kind of made the first game pointless because they just erase your character and start you over and kind of imply that the world has been restarted. So like, what was the point of the first game? And it's really interesting the ways in which it lays out the story. That, I mean, it basically canonizes a particular story for you so that you can then roll into the second one. And I almost think that makes that like a better experience in some way.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but yeah, like, so I didn't care about it, and then I don't know. I mean, it's I am enjoying getting to look at Mass Effect through someone who's playing its eyes, but everything you're saying does not make it seem like a game that I would want to play.
I mean, like, I got the PlayStation version for free, and I got the Steam version for $7. So do I feel like financially no, like I'm having a phenomenal amount of time with these games, and I am having a lot of fun while I'm in these games, like doing it. Like that is all great. And like I said, I'm gonna look into doing some modding and stuff, and I'm gonna get to do some stuff that way. That seems really cool too. So like there is definitely an experience around Mass Effect that I am having that I am going to treasure for the rest of my life. And I do think that Mass Effect 2, if I really sat down and really poked at it, like it's a very solid RPG experience on its own. It's just that as I look at like this whole like Mass Effect concept and everything that happened at the time and what that means for video games now and all of that, like a lot of what happened at the end of Mass Effect, and like the introduction of the good ending, or at least the savior ending, or whatever the fuck the community calls it, because they don't call it a good ending. They all still hate it, but like the new ending, like that is really one of the first big examples of a billion-dollar video game company giving into fan pressure, right, in some way, and they didn't succeed. But like you see that, and then you look at something like the Snyder Cut, and like we wonder, where did fans get this kind of like this kind of attitude of you owe us this, right? From studios and from artists and from places that like you're like you owe us this, and then it comes out and it's kind of just like there's a reason we didn't put this one out, but now you know why. It's like it's kind of the answer that we always get. But it, Mass Effect is one of the first big instances in my time, like paying attention to pop culture, that I can think of, right? Like is the ending of Mass Effect. So I had to know, and I have to know, and so it's kind of like the GoldenEye thing, where like I don't know if I'm loving this experience as much as everybody else in the world really loves this experience, and so that's why it's held up as this piece of video gaming history. But I am very much willing to be a part of it, and I'm very happy engaging with it. It's not like, well, it's not like something like Avatar, which we could talk about as the Best Picture nominee. Avatar, Way of Water, by the way, Dev. But like, I just have no interest in engaging in that, and I can't take part in that, right? So like, where is my line of like, what kind of bullshit am I willing to put up with in order to be part of the conversation, right?
Yeah. Oh God, I don't want. Are we talking about Best Picture stuff? I don't really want to talk about the Oscars
I mean,
right now.
like Oscar noms came out. Some of them are not surprising. Some are. I'm surprised there's not more Avatar: Way of Water with the way that the world's been talking about it. But also, like the Best Picture nomination is, makes sense. And then like other stuff, like it's a little weird that as much love as the menu got with other award shows this year, and like in the zeitgeist, to just see it's just absent from the Academy Awards. Michelle Yeoh got her nomination for Everything Everywhere, so my plan is coming together. I'm not going to take credit for her amazing performance. That's bullshit. No, she's. I'm very excited to see where that one goes. If she can pull it off, because there is some other big hitters, and that I mean, Kate Blanchett and Tar is also nominated, and that movie is a force to be reckoned with right now. There's a lot of movies that we've talked about already this year that are pretty obviously up for contention, and I think we called a lot of them, the Fablemans and stuff like that.
Yeah, the movies that people were talking about now that the entire landscape of cinema has shifted. Yeah. Like, that's the weirdest thing about it. They really do feel like the Best Picture of the Year nominations, because all of these are the movies that I had conversations with people about. Yeah. It wasn't like these are movies that hadn't come out yet, but had gotten to run for a week in New York and LA, so that's why they got the nomination, because of the people that were able to see it then, and then we're going to see them come out in January and times after that. I feel like everything was out and available, and it was the stuff that people were talking about, the people who like, not even the people who just love movies, but the people who like who live in the world. So it's really interesting how that has shifted. True.
I think that's also really interesting if you look at like just purely the number of movies nominated, not just Best Picture, but across the board, the number of movies nominated this year that are currently available to the home viewer, even if they don't want to leave the house. Like it's crazy, like this year, how many of these movies you can just go watch today, which is like, to your point, right? Like it's such a rare thing of like being able to say, oh yeah, like if we wanted to, we could sit down and watch Everywhere All at Once right now, right? If we wanted to, we could watch, we could watch Tar. I think that one's available.
Tar just came out on Peacock, so if you are a subscriber, it's available right there.
Yeah, you do have to navigate the bullshit that is like the streaming wildlands nowadays, right? Like for sure, there is that aspect to it, but it is available to you. Like you can go sit down at your computer, look up where it is, and purchase it to watch, right? It's crazy like how many of those movies are currently available to you in that way. That's just usually not the case by this time of year.
Yeah, and it's an interesting shift. But other than that, like I still have no interest in the Academy Awards.
No, me either. No, especially because we're also right now in the middle of Sundance, like literally in the middle of it. As we end recording today, I'm going to go watch the last couple of movies we have on the docket. So like I'm also up in a bunch of that weird stuff. Stephen Dorff says hi from one of the weirdest films I've ever seen.
Good. Oh, man. Good. It's nice to hear from Stephen Dorff.
You hear like some of the stuff he was saying this week about like how he's like, Marvel nowadays is bullshit. Back when I was making Marvel movies, that was the day. Was basically what he said.
We already did Blade, and it was better than whatever they're gonna do. I believe was the exact quote.
Yeah. Grumpy Stephen Dorff being like, I was there before it was cool. It's all right, man. Like the thing about Blade is like we've talked about Blade. Like it's still a beloved movie, and yeah, people do kind of like forget that like it was a Marvel experience, but he's not wrong. Like it was a really good Marvel movie back before the MCU. The problem is like he gets to talk from that place of being in the good one.
Yeah, exactly. There's that interesting thing there of,
Yeah.
and then Blade eventually, in the eyes of the fans, comes down to Blade Trinity, which is like very divisive.
Yeah, Blade
So,
Trinity, which is it gets wrapped up in a lot of the other Marvel-y superhero nonsense of like, hey, let's put a goofy Ryan Reynolds-esque character on screen to make jokes while we're trying to have this very serious conversation about this shit. Yeah, it was...
I mean, well, we say that it gets bogged down in it. Isn't it sort of like the creator of that? Because it's a year before Iron Man that we're blessed with Trinity. So, like, did they learn the wrong lessons from Trinity?
I think it learns a lot from sorry, when I'm talking about like quirky, this is not working for me. It's funny that we say this and that's what you think of the MCU. I was thinking of like Sam Raimi and like Chris Evans as Human Torch and things like that.
Gotcha.
Like
Understood,
it falls into that pre-MCU Marvel bullshit that I think is more in line with what Stephen Dorff was
talking
really
about. Yeah.
Well, no, he was talking about, like, I want to make it clear, he was talking about the MCU. I'm not going to change that. Like, he's definitely talking about the ways in which the MCU and Disney Marvel have really changed the ways in which Marvel movies are made and superhero movies are made. And he was commenting on like back before like it got corporate. I don't know what he was trying to say in that regard, but back before, in the before times when they got to make these kinds of movies. And he does even give a shit out that it's really funny that you mentioned Blade Trinity, because he does even give a shout out to Blade 2 in that same quote. He talks about Guillermo del Toro messing around or something like that. Like, so he even gives Blade 2 this cred, but does not touch on Trinity.
Yeah. Well, because it was when things were getting weirdly, these are worth a lot of money, so now the studios want to have control over them so that they can maximize their profit. 2007, as we learned, looking at a lot of the movies that made us from that year, was a lot of meddling from the studios was the ultimate problem.
I mean, I think that encapsulates what was going on in the 90s and the 2000s in general, though, right? And like, as we've learned from things like, I mean, it gets as nefarious as like the Me Too movement, which I know encompassed much more than just that 20 years of cinema, but specifically looking at Harvey Weinstein and stuff in that 20 years, how studio meddling, when it has this like malicious intent behind it, comes to fruition. And like, people wonder, how did he get away with this? And it's because like studio meddling in films and people showing up saying, yeah, we're going to rewrite your film so that this character doesn't exist anymore, or so this character now has more screen time because of other deals that we've made and things like that. Like that was happening. And that was the problem, is that movies were getting made not by the people on set making the movies, but by people sitting in boardrooms. And I mean, this still happens, right? Like, I'm not going to pretend that this has gone away completely, but this is the entire thing that something like Sundance exists to fight against. So for literally decades, like the idea of a studio coming in and saying, this is the way we're going to make this movie, like, that's always been part of the system. The problem is that, you know, like I said, you end up in the 90s and the 2000s and it becomes full of just greed, you know, if not something worse.
Yeah. It's I mean, here's what I did. Here's this thing that I did last night. I watched the Entourage movie from 2015. Oh. Have you ever seen the Entourage movie? Have you ever seen Entourage?
Yeah, so Entourage, I don't know if this is going to be a big surprise to Devin, but because he knows who I lived with, but my senior year of college, Entourage got very big in the group.
Yeah, that's not surprising at all.
So Entourage holds a weird place in my heart, in that, like, I actually do really love a lot of the like stories, and I think some of the character stuff and things that goes on in that show are great, but the ways in which that show promoted a culture that then became the culture, and like it's that classic case where like something like Jeremy Piven's character on Entourage, Ari, right? That's
Ari Gold, baby.
He is kind of worshipped by certain people, and if you watch that show, like, he is not meant to be. It's the Breaking Bad problem. It's the you know,
Clerks.
It's the Clerks problem.
Yeah.
It's the problem we talk about all the time. Is like, it is a show about the toxic masculinity present, and the ways in which that is fostered and in some ways like necessary. That's not the right term, but like that's what that show is. supposing, shall we say, like the ways in which that kind of lifestyle is propagated by that community, like people latched onto it as if they were being told this is the way to make it, not like this is the terrible shit that happens once you do, right? Like, and so all wrong lessons learned. So Entourage and I have a very weird relationship because I totally get the hate for it. I totally understand why people want nothing to do with it and why it kind of has this kind of like shuffle it under the rug reputation now, despite how big it was at the time, like to the point, like you said, it even got its own movie. Like there's this weird swirling soup for me of like, yeah, but also if you watch it, like there's some really good stuff going on the show.
Well, I love the movie. The movie, when I saw it, and I never watched the show, it was in that year when I was trying to do 365 movies, so I was just literally seeing whatever I could. And I'm like, I've never seen the show, but the movie looks really good. Like, it had really good trailers. I walked out of it. I went on IMDb. I gave it 10 stars, which is the equivalent of 5 stars, right? We've talked about this.
Right.
Really, really enjoyed the movie. But what I enjoyed about the movie is going and living that like lifestyle for like 90 minutes, like getting that glimpse into the world. I don't know if I could watch the show because you're not wrong. You see a lot of like the way they treat each other is pure toxic masculinity. Ari in the movie is sort of redeemed in a lot of ways. Like it's about his redemption based on everything that you just said.
Yeah.
So like really like that movie, but watching it last night, and I only watched it last night because I caught the end of My Cousin Vinny. And then afterwards is like the Entourage movie, and I'm like, I'm not changing the channel. I'm just going to keep it on, right? Thanks, HBO Zone. And I watched Entourage and found myself enjoying it again, but also at the same time being like, this movie aged like milk. When you think about the people who are in that movie who have since been called out, like Piers Morgan is the framing device of that movie, doing a story about Vince. I'm like, ugh. I'm trying to think of like the other ones where I'm just like, oh my god, like these people are people we know were not good people, like, and they're hanging out with Entourage, them.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that Entourage has always kind of had a poisoned well because of the fact that it does come from, Mark Wahlberg and his production company. And I mean, I don't know how many people are aware of this, but Mark Wahlberg has terrible history in his past of shit that he has done. I mean, racism, literally went to prison for like racist attacks back when he was like a teenager and stuff like that. Like he has had violence issues. He has had issues with like on set with certain actors and directors. Like he's got a troubled history in and of himself. And like, take your opinion where you will. Like he has also made, a lot of efforts to apologize for the things that he has done, whether or not those apologies are genuine or like, he wasn't apologizing to me, so it's not really my place to like judge whether or not they was like adequate. So there's this weird level of like, if you're already kind of on ball with Entourage, you're already kind of buying into a lot of that world. And then, I mean, Jeremy Piven's no peach.
Yeah, Jeremy Piven's no peach either. Like, that's it. Yeah,
there's a ton of issues on Entourage working with people, right? Like there's that shit there. They have an entire arc in that show where they deal with Seth Green, who, like, speaking of Mass Effect, like Seth Green is a main character in that show and in that game, and like it's been really weird for me to really kind of tackle, some of the stuff that we learned about Seth Green. Although I think that a lot of the opinion on Seth Green has really flipped in the last few years now that we've learned a lot about what working with Joss Whedon in general was like. So the idea of Seth Green being kind of a princess on set and being demanding and wanting to like fight against some of the stuff that was going on around him, that attitude and being written out of Buffy because of it, that attitude coming like that side of the story, everything I know about like Seth Green and the ways in which he was kind of pushed out of that group and kind of did his own thing, like completely reshaped by now learning what an asshole Joss Whedon was probably being on set. So like maybe Seth Green was just legitimately trying to be like, I'm not working with this type anymore, right? So I've been trying to like struggle with that. And then like you mentioned Entourage, and the first thing I think of is I think he has like a 5 or 6 episode arc, right? Like Bob Saget shows up for a while and he had his own shit when he was alive that like people had issues with, right? Like there's always just kind of this air of, if you're in on Entourage, you're in on some fringe toxic white guy shit. Yeah. You just have to know that.
And it all like came to a head. Like Matt Lauer is prominently featured as like the only member of the media they talk to besides Piers Morgan.
Yep.
Like, yeah, the Jeremy Piven thing was there. It's just like it all came to a head in the 8 years since that movie came out. And I'm just like, this is a fun experience to rewatch this movie, but I know I should never do it again.
Yeah,
like
I
this
think
is
there's a good reason why Entourage has been kind of left to just kind of get dusty on the shelf.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any real reason that I would recommend anybody go back to it,
Yeah. But, talking about Hollywood and the studios and all that, it plays into that because Haley Joel Osment plays the son of an investor, a Texas investor in movies, which again really kind of leads into that whole cleaning money thing that we've talked about on the show before. Like, yeah, Hollywood exists for certain reasons, and that's all that I'll say.
I mean, but Hollywood is a business, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, right? Is we always like to think about like the art form of cinema, and that's great. And like, there are definitely artists working in Hollywood making movies, but at the end of the day, Hollywood is a business town. It is there for the business of making movies, and so like, this is not to forgive anything or tell people to like get over anything. Like, fight the good fight. Just know who you're fighting. It's like you're going up against when Hollywood's not on your side in this conversation.
Know who you're fighting for and what you're fighting against. Is that like if you're defending it, understand that there's some shit that's going on in Hollywood.
Yeah. No, it's as I mentioned, I'm kind of sitting here kind of in the soup of Sundance, like dealing with a lot of, really interesting stuff because we purposely saved a couple of movies for the end because they're bigger studio produced ones. We've got one that Dirty Sanchez put together. That's Will Ferrell and Adam McKay's studio. They have a movie at Sundance this year called Theater Camp, and that's one of the ones that we've still yet to watch. We watched one the other day that was an animated movie, Terry Pratchett's Amazing Maurice and his Educated Rodents, and it's really cute but also super marketable. Like, some dark stuff because it's Pratchett. Like, there's some stuff dealing with death in it that I think would mean that Disney wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, but otherwise like animated very much in that style, like, big-eyed, big-headed characters and a very goofy like sound effects style stuff happening as far as like the soundscape goes, and like, so it very just marketable is I think the best way to put it. Really wild to see something like that at Sundance. That being said, I did also, as I said, watch Stephen Dorff become what I'm pretty sure was a giant fetus Frankenstein and like have a claymation fight with an angel. It got real weird. That movie Divinity is something else. We'll have to talk about that experience after once I have some time to process it. But yeah, it's so thinking about something like Entourage that so embraces like the Hollywood oeuvre while I'm sitting here watching a bunch of like indie artists like filming shit in Utah trying to fight that whole thing, like is it's a weird headspace.
Yeah, it was. I didn't know what to do with it, but I'm like, I'm watching it because it's there. But yeah, but Haley Joel Osment is the son of the guy who invested half of the budget for the movie that Vince is shooting in the Entourage movie. Spoilers for the Entourage movie, I guess, if you haven't seen it, or if you might rush out after everything that we've said about the frayed relationship that Entourage has with reality in 2023. And he tries
Vince
to...
is making like a passion project movie, and he's trying to...
Well, Vince just wants to direct something. He's like, I want to direct Hyde. It's a passion project once he starts with it, but it's not like it's a script he wrote or anything like that.
No, but he's trying to break out of just being the pretty boy actor and
Right.
move into like a deeper role, right?
Yeah. And Emily Ratajkowski, because she's the it girl at the time in 2015, and she's flirting with Vince, and then Haley Joel Osment shows up as this character, and he's like, I love Emily Ratajkowski because again, she's the flavor of the week, and he ends up getting her to go home with her to watch Vince's movie, but then she's like, have a good night, and then Vince sneaks in and does it, and then that one action is why Haley Joel Osment is like, I don't want this movie to happen anymore, and it has all these demands about what he wants changed in the movie. And then, like, the finality of it is, it all comes down to the fact that he's hurt because Emily Ratajkowski wanted to get with Vince instead of him. And it's just like, wow. How often does that happen in Hollywood? Especially in the wake of everything we know with Me Too.
Well, and
And
specifically Weinstein, right?
yeah,
Like that whole so I mean that's the whole thing, right? Where you point at something like Entourage and you say like if you look at this as a conversation about what was happening in Hollywood at the time, it's it's really interesting because it does capture a lot of that toxic shit that we then learned was real. And so like in a weird way, like saying you don't want to watch Entourage because it has all this stuff in it is like saying it's too much like reality, which I think is a fair critique, right? But also saying that like it also propagates a lot of that shit. Like it has that problem where by putting that thing on a pedestal, by putting this problem on display, are you just becoming part of the
yeah. Does it
problem after a
normalize the
while?
problem,
and
or
and
does it
and in a
teach
lot
people
of
that's
ways
how
I
it
think it
works?
and in a lot of ways I think it does. Like I think that's why as we've often said with things like satire, you need a really deft hand. Like you need a good director, you need a good actor, you need a good writer, all at the same time working together to get this thing on screen so that the audience then also gets the point. You need a lot of people working in concert, and that doesn't often happen. And Entourage misses on that more than it hits.
Yeah, I'll agree. And all I've ever seen is the movie. I've never done anything else,
Yeah.
and it is. But yeah, but I think the really crazy thing about it, like the thing that I'm having just such a difficult time like reconciling in my mind, is that like they're doing this satire, they're shining their light on it, but then also the players that they're having in it are some of the worst propagators of it. And did they
Exactly.
know that at the time, or like
Yeah, I don't think that's the problem. Is like I don't think you can give them that benefit of that doubt, right? Like you can't say did they know Matt Lauer like was specifically had like a button under his desk to like eject women from his office or whatever, like that kind of
he
shit.
was
Like I
trapping them in the office?
oh wait, is that what it
Yeah,
was? Yeah, I
yeah.
just remember the button like a fucking like Doctor Evil style villain like had like a fucking secret button to lock the door in his office or some shit. Like it was just
Yeah, like it's diabolical.
it's yeah,
When
and
you
right. So
yeah.
do they know that when they have Matt Lauer be the only person that interviews them in that movie? No, I like even if they did, who is that joke for, right? Like they can't be making it as a joke because the reference nobody gets the reference until we now know all this shit about him, right? So like it can't possibly be like what is the hopeful outcome as an artist in that position putting that shit on display that maybe like eventually somebody will look into everybody ever involved in Entourage like burning it all from the inside burning it down from the inside. I don't think that's what Mark Wahlberg and his friends were doing,
I
unfortunately.
have no desire to do this, but if there's someone out there looking for a good topic for a true crime podcast, Entourage is right there. You got 6 seasons in a movie
Yeah. Oh man.
to
Yeah.
dig through and see what did they know, and if they didn't know, what were the actions somehow fueled by having been touched by the Entourage finger?
Well, I mean, at some point, like all of psychology is a brain studying itself, right?
Yeah,
Like, and so this idea being that they are artists. I mean, like if they are artists in that world, right? They live in Hollywood. They're experiencing this life, especially somebody like Mark Wahlberg, who at this point had already been there for 30 years of his life, right? Like somebody who's just in this shit, right? Like, and you want to finally say something about it, like that should be celebrated, right? Like somebody from that community saying, "I'm going to put this shit on blast so that everybody out there knows what's going on." Like, yeah, it's just that like I wonder if all it ever was the Entourage movie, if there'd be a wider discussion about like, ooh, like this gets really dangerous, but it points out this problem. Like, is it too much of a like? Because the other thing about Entourage you got to remember is that it's also starting from a really weird place with a lot of people because at the time it was shoved down our throats. Everything was Entourage. Everything was like you gotta you gotta have the spiked up hair. You gotta have the fucking what's the buckle, right? Like that's like the store where you basically if you want to dress like anybody in that group, just go to Buckle and you can get like the Ed Hardy jeans and all that shit. Like there's a certain aesthetic to that was propagated by again people I think misreading Entourage and wanting to be like them. That kind of became like the you got to be watching Entourage and you got to be dressed this way and you got to be going out and doing this shit. You got to be going to this and taking in this and all that because of Entourage. And like nobody likes that, right? Like so it also has that aspect to it where it just got so big that like people would just like don't want to give it the any due, right? And so how does your message survive something like that if there is a message to even be had?
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Don't know.
We might be looking for a message where there is no message. And for me, it was one of those shows where I'm just like, I'm not ever touching it. And then I'm like, oh, movie? I can sit in a movie theater and see what this and get some idea about what this world is about. And my walk away from it as somebody in 2015 who was deeply immersed in cinema, was like watching that world and trying to do it. It was a really cool representation of that world that like felt like it was real on another level too. Like they weren't trying to gloss over some of the dirtier parts of Hollywood because they like some of the negative shit that they had to deal with. So I don't know. It was interesting to watch it again. I think I'd still give it 10 stars on IMDb. That's like the worst part of it, is that it's still tightly paced, really like good humor. Like it doesn't feel like it's at anybody's expense except for the guys who are fake in the show. Like Johnny Drama, you're laughing at Johnny Drama, but then he has a nice moment and everything like that. Like it was an enjoyable film. It's just real sad that
and I think the other thing is that we also have the 2020 hindsight of seeing that people would see something like that, and I don't know why we would think any different, but like taking it in as those guys are the ones to emulate, right? Like wanting to be like them, wanting to treat people the way that they treat people, or get the things that they get, the ways in which they get them. You know, they had HBO has always had this problem. They had that problem with Sopranos, right? Even Sex and the City in a lot of ways. Like we look back now on Sex and the City, and there are a lot of people that stylize their life. You know, are you a Carrie, right? Like that kind of shit of like, who are you? You know, who are you following? What are your archetypes? How do you behave? And you go back and you watch Sex and the City, and the ways in which they treat one another and treat men and treat other women, like it sucks. like they're not good people, right? But this always happens in the moment. We don't have this ability to really truly kind of like consider all of the angles, you know, and that's just life.
That's life. So, yeah, we don't know
but
until we know.
In which people used to, you know, and people still do this. They just do it now with YouTube stars instead of HBO shows. But the ways in which people latch onto a personality and act like this is the way that we should all be behaving, like, you know, I think that's just part of like taking in art. And we have to be really careful and know that that's going to happen. But I also don't think that should stop things from being made, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. Like you can't be preventative of it, right? You should make the art that you think is worth making at the time. And then, I mean, that's what school is. You know, one of the guys that we went to college with was always like, his argument whenever we were analyzing stuff was, how do we know this is what the author actually wanted? And it's like, it doesn't really matter if it's what Shakespeare wanted when he wrote this 400 years ago. It is what we take from it now, because Shakespeare is not there to tell us.
Well, and then think about the ways in which that's applied nowadays when like a comic book adaptation or a story adaptation happens and people automatically jump on something like, oh, this character's black and in the story they were white. Like, what? You're changing the author's vision. You're changing all this. And it's just like, no, I'm just representing what a community actually probably looked like then, plus what we know a community looks like now. So like, calm your shit. Like I'm trying to ground this in a reality that maybe was not present at the time, or that like we didn't have the ability to see. It's just the ways in which people want to try and give authority specifically to creators is important, right? Like that there needs to always be an acknowledgement of the creator, I think. But like we also need to learn that the creator's not the only person that like has an opinion or a thought, or like the very way you take in a thing is going to be changed by your context, right? Like that's
perception, man, is the one thing that we all own ourselves.
Right.
I can't give you my perspective on something. I could try to, but even then it's me relating a thought to you, and you're still going to filter it through how you filter things.
With the Shakespeare conversation, we don't have him here to say like, no, I meant this or I meant that. But what's really funny is when you see these kinds of guys that are just like, oh, you're making all of these changes to this thing. This is not what Neil Gaiman meant. And then Neil Gaiman gets on. It's just like, have you ever even read Sandman? Like, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm working on this show. Believe me, this is what I want. Like calm the fuck down. Or Percy Jackson is the one that's really happening with it a lot right now that I'm seeing. Is there's just more and more stuff coming out. Lance Reddick once again getting in there and fucking just like turning the tables on everybody, being like, I'm gonna play another famous white guy. And like everybody just being like, that's not my Zeus, and it's just like, calm down. Like, and Rick Riordan is just like, yep, I'm here and I'm making these decisions and I'm helping with this and I love all of this, all of it. A plus.
Look, they can finally be tween-aged characters,
Yeah.
but Zeus is going to be black. That's the concession you got to make.
Yeah, that's good. Just put that math on the table for everybody.
And then while they're trying to figure it out, you make it in peace. Because, like, that's the weirdest thing about Percy Jackson. The original ones where they're like, why did they age him up? And I'm like, I don't know. Probably because when you're reading it in a book, it's very different from when you're watching it on a screen.
Yeah, I mean, also they aged him up because that's just what you did at the time. It was an action movie that required a lot of CGI, and they wanted to bring in a 20-year-old that in their eyes they could depend on versus say a 13-year-old that they weren't sure, and
Yeah.
like we've since moved past that. Slash, isn't Netflix the one making Percy Jackson, and they've got their child actor stable.
Yeah, they love it.
Down,
It's
so
going to be
yeah,
that 90s show with mythical powers. That's not true. I love the 90s
Don't
show
do that.
cast. I think
Don't
they're
do
great.
that.
But you're the one who's saying that they have a corral of child actors.
No, what I'm saying is that they have they have a way of finding child actors, because I mean, like, they've got their Stranger Things cast, they've got that 90s show, they've got their entire collection of kids movies and romantic teen comedies and stuff. Like, they are very capable of finding a group of 13, 14-year-old kids that can handle themselves on camera. Like, whoever is in casting at Netflix knows what they're doing in that regard. Right. And you can't say that about everybody. Right. And so, like, the other thing about Percy Jackson is it was just handled by a specific team that maybe working with kids was not their forte.
Yeah. Or, I mean, it's a liability. It was a huge liability at the time when Percy Jackson came out to put a kid on a film set because we knew about how toxic those environments were.
Yeah. Yes.
Like,
I mean, I do also, like, I don't want to paint over the fact that at the same time there was a lot of sexy teen movies coming out, like the Insurgent movies and the Maze Runner movies, and then also Hunger Games and all of this, and you had 23-year-olds playing teens so that they could be like sexy teens.
Yeah,
right?
so they could be sexualized,
right?
which is
Right.
I mean, I watched Shailene Woodley lose her virginity 4 times in movies, like, and she was 24 at the time, and she was
so,
playing
like,
I'm young and I'm new to this, and it's just like, it's weird that, like, that's the roles you play. And then it's even weirder because I didn't know that she was on The Secret Life of the American Teenager, where like that's what that whole show was about.
Stories about,
It's strange. I don't know. I don't really think about Percy Jackson. It was never like a book that I read, and I never saw the movie. So they are moving forward though, and good for Lance Reddick. I'm a big fan of him, and it'll be a fine Zeus. We let Russell Crowe be Zeus.
He was such a good Wesker. Like, he was amazingly good in the Resident Evil series, and like completely overshadowed by a bunch of fanboys who were like, "Oh, this story sucks. Well, I want it to be like, well, not the first one because that one sucked. Not the second story because that one's not great either. Well, wait, once you get into 7, the story's pretty good." Like, I've still got feelings about the Resident Evil fan base and the ways that they treated that show, because I think that show was a fucking blast.
I liked what they were trying to do with Resident Evil in terms of media, where they're like, it's kind of a multiverse, because you have Welcome to Raccoon City, which releases, like, 3 months before the show on Netflix? So it's like...
Well, and a month before that, they had released the animated show.
Yeah, so
they had the animated show, they had the animated movies, which the animated show is in timeline with the movies. There is definitely references to the animated movies in that regard. But then you had the live action show that definitely is in timeline with the video games. Like, super easy to slot in exactly where it fits in the video games by the end of that series. Everybody that talked about how it was like shitting on the story, like, did not watch the last 2 or 3 episodes, because they talk about the ways, like, the reveal of how that show fits into the story was one of my favorite reveals. And then on top of that, you have the movies, which then they completely reboot with Welcome to Raccoon City. So there's like 4 or 5 different universes going on.
And I love it. I'm all for like different
Not to say the
universes.
comics, man, the fucking like mangas and comics
Oh,
that
and the
they
books,
put
right?
out.
Like the
Yeah.
books that like these are going to contradict themselves because I'm just having fun writing about zombies in this one city.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like,
Well, these are going to contradict themselves because I'm writing about Resident Evil in real time, and guess and lo and behold, the timeline of the Resident Evil stories is not always clear.
jeez. Yeah. And then also like Dead Rising, which is also zombies from Capcom and
Right.
completely different.
Right. Right.
But not so different. Because like the whole Zombrex corpo nature of it.
I feel like if you revealed that Dead Rising was just in the Resident Evil universe the whole time, I'd so 100% be on board for that. Like, but they'd have to be like, it'd be like we're finding out that Portal takes place in the same universe as Half-Life, right?
Yeah.
Where like Aperture is up against Black Mesa, like they're like whoever created Zombrex, I forget the name of the evil corporation in that one, but that corporation up against Umbrella, and they just both happen to be hating zombies.
It's just
The
that
end result of pharmaceuticals in that universe is just always zombies.
zombies. Well, Zombrex, I mean, like the thing was like, we just need more zombies in order to harvest the cure from. It's fine. And it's like, no, that's really not fine at all, what you do.
No, that's not, yeah.
God, I should play the Dead Rising games again. That's just a good time. I don't know. There's so many games I want to play. I had such a drought last year, and now like I have 7 games that I want to play right now.
Yeah, I'm there. I'm still in a like a little bit of a holding pattern as far as new games go.
Yeah, I mean the next new
There's-
game for me is the 23rd of February.
I do want to
So-
touch. I do want to get my hands on like just touch the Dead Space remake. Dead Space the original version made me pee myself when I first played it. So like I've been very scared to go back to it. So I'm not gonna sit here and promise I would play the entirety of the remake. But man, if I could play like an hour or 2 of that Dead Space remake, that would be pretty cool.
I kind of want to just play Dead Space. It's on Game Pass. I should dedicate more time to playing things on Game Pass.
I mean, the
That's my
remake
thing.
is, by all accounts so far, at least from what I've seen from various
good stuff that I'm
YouTubers
hearing.
and people, is it's a really good update of that game. Like makes it playable now because I know that Dead Space has been available both on Game Pass and a couple of other places to get your hands on, and it's just hitting that wall for a lot of people that all of these games do, where like it was made at a time and like there's a lot of issues with like everything being brown and black, and like color, like not being able to tell where things are in because it was like Gears of War time where everything was colored brown and black, and then the camera got a yellow filter put over it, so it just made it even worse.
Yeah. Which I want to go back to GoldenEye, and this is a negative comment about GoldenEye. I'll say that game just loves. This is an all-white world. Good luck. This is an
Yeah, good luck in
all-green
the
world. Good luck.
Yeah.
This is all red. This is the reddest place you've ever been. You're on Mars, James. Look out for Doom Guy. It's just like I do not remember this game being so monochromatic and expecting me to figure things out. Yeah, it's been an interesting thing. All right, so I have one more thing that we need to talk about because we're the Say Report. So is there anything else that you want to throw onto the episode before I transition into that?
No, not too huge. No, let's do this. I think that we've got a lot of stuff definitely to look forward to this year. But like you're saying there, I don't think there's anything too big to talk about just yet. There's been some weird news left and right with like HBO and cancellations and.
I want to know more about it. I can't believe that it is the 100th year of Warner Brothers and HBO Max took the shit that they took.
Just shit the bed. Like went from like top of the charts, best streaming service available out there, to now just being in this weird limbo of, is this even going to exist in a year?
I wonder if they're trying to get sold off. And we've had that conversation off mic about how much does Disney need to offer them for them to absorb it.
Has HBO Go disappeared yet, or is that still in the water?
HBO Go disappeared. It became Max.
Right.
Yeah.
I knew when Max came out, they were talking about that Go was just going to be folded in, but I didn't know if it went away immediately, because I remember there being a weird time period where you could have Go and Max
and people were pointing out kind of the idiocy of that, but then that conversation seemed to disappear pretty quick. So they must have, yeah.
I mean, it was as soon as Max went live, it disappeared because there was that weird time where they had the two. What would eventually become Max?
Well, the reason they had the two is because remember, Go was tied specifically. In order to have Go, you had to have an HBO account.
Right.
So Go existed for a while after Max was created because there were people that were paying for HBO, like paying for the channel, that were still using HBO Go as their way to consume it, and migrating those people to a new service. Like, you don't get to just walk in the door and cancel Go when people are like, the reason I pay for HBO is this streaming part of it. So they like having to migrate people to Max, because just having HBO didn't automatically get you a Max subscription, but it did automatically get you a Go subscription.
No, it automatically got you a Max subscription. That's that's why I have HBO Max, is because we have HBO at the house.
Okay, that was not the case at first, at least because there were people paying for if that was the case, they were not making that clear at first, because there were definitely people that were paying for both HBO and HBO Max.
So I think maybe that could have been people
complaining about that.
Maybe if they had bought like an annual plan, and like if there was something there where they didn't want to bring it over, I don't know. All I know is that the day that HBO Max went live, I tried to sign into HBO Go and said, you need to sign into HBO Max.
Yeah.
And that was the same credentials that I used for Go, and I had full access. So I don't know. I don't know about anything like that. But there's also the other one, though, because there was HBO like Plus, which was the one where you could just pay for that, and it wasn't Go.
Well, that's what I thought Go was. So maybe we're talking about two different things.
Yeah, so I think
Go or whatever the like, there is a streaming HBO that is HBO and only HBO thing out there. And there was a lot of people that were like, I'm already in this universe with this whole thing. I'm not going to pay you for just that plus cartoons, which is what HBO Max looked like to a lot of people. And so they had a hard time really early on kind of consolidating a lot of what was going on.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't even remember the name of that one. I know that there was that other one, but Go is what grew into Max. And all it felt like to me was, I now have more things available that I didn't have before.
Yeah.
So it felt like an upgrade to me, but I didn't have to pay any more money. So I don't know. But talking about streaming, pulling the big slider down on the final topic, How I Met Your Father is finally back. Season 2. What?
Which we just loved on this show.
I don't know. The first episode of season 2 was fire. It was such a good episode of television.
I'm glad to hear that. If you go back and listen to our How I Met Your Father episode, we did not necessarily have many glowing things to say about
that. No, it's that. But I mean, I watched it. I stayed up till midnight and watched it as soon as I could. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I think I'm a fan, but I don't want to admit that I'm a fan, because who knows what happens if you do. But I will say, like, if season 2 can be the level of quality that the first episode was, I'm very excited. Like, it was so good. My mother was laughing out loud.
You're the only person I know that has watched it. We watched it, right? And we talked about how there were some people around us that were like, yeah, okay, try it, it's and all that. And then very quickly, like, we all came to the conclusion, because I'm going to even include us in this, because we did an entire episode saying exactly this, that whatever good there was to be had there was not worth a lot of the slog of the rest of it. And that seemed to be the basic opinion by everybody I know that watched that show, like IRL. Yeah. So, like, if it finds some life with like a good second season, like, that's really cool. And I think that's even in line with what we said last time, because I've recently listened to that episode because I knew that this new season was coming out, and I wanted to make sure that, like, I remembered without having to watch How I Met Your Father again. So that's exactly where I was like, I don't mind that I watched it once, but I have no desire to rewatch it, versus the first season of How I Met Your Mother, which we talked about was like just constantly on repeat in our circle, right? Yeah. Like, so there's that, like, and hearing that there might be a second season, like revitalization of that show is cool, but I just don't have it in me to care until I do, I guess.
And yeah, and I get that. And I will say this, I had started the rewatch of season 1, and I got like 6 episodes through, and I'm like, you know what, I'm good. I'm okay. I'm just gonna watch the second season. I don't need to keep doing this.
Yeah.
it's inoffensive background noise the first season, but it is a lot of place setting that I will say so far for the first episode of season 2 all paid off. Like real good payoff on everything that they set up with the first season. Like people who don't laugh out loud at TV shows laughing out loud in this house.
That's
and
cool.
that felt pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I hope it keeps going.
That show has a really endearing cast. It has really good pedigree in terms of the people behind the camera. It just didn't amount to much in the first season. So if there's something there for a season 2, like that'll be cool to follow.
Yeah. I hope that, and we'll see what happens. That's the end of it. But I will also say this, spoilers for How I Met Your Father season 2 episode 1, MPH showed up at the very end. So that was pretty cool. Like that was like a cheer moment for me.
Good.
Yeah. So it's I know that it's like I clearly have a lot of thoughts because of what How I Met Your Mother was to me and then eventually became to me. And yeah, I put down my thoughts on season 1, right? It's out there. You can listen to it. Timing is everything, as they say. But I don't know. I'm excited after the first episode of season 2, where the first episode of season 2 for How I Met Your Mother, I was not excited.
Interesting.
So who knows?
Oh,
Maybe they flipped the script on that. But I think that's it. I think that's everything that we got to say for this week of the Say Report. If you have something specifically to get to Sejohn, if you want the inside scoop on everything from Sundance, you can tweet us at the Say Report and make sure you mention that the question's for Sejohn, and we'll make sure it gets to him.
And if you're looking to do some sitting on the couch and playing GoldenEye, make sure you bring the pizza money and the Sprite, and you can find Devin at Devin D. Decker.
Just a friendly reminder, Pizza Hut is bringing back the Big New Yorker pizza on February 1st.
Who had the Bigfoot? Was that Pizza Hut? Or
that was also
Domino's?
Pizza Hut. Yeah, it was 2 feet of pizza. But the
Bring
Big
back
New
the
Yorker,
Bigfoot.
aside from the fact that Donald Trump was prominently featured in all of the marketing for it,
I forgot about that.
it was just delicious pizza. I'm so excited to get one on Wednesday and be immediately disappointed, and then watch Wakanda Forever. Because that's also coming on the 1st of February. A lot of good things happening on Wednesday of this coming week. So make sure you got your schedule cleared out to enjoy it. But until then, Will, I think it's time you bring us home. Have a good one, folks.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devin Decker and Sejohn Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.